Ferrari engineers were reportedly left speechless by Lewis Hamilton's Hungary Telemetry, but the most important part of the story is still hidden. The available source points to 2 GP blog reports published on July 26, yet it does not reveal the actual lap data, the comparison figures, or the engineers' exact reactions. And that missing evidence creates one enormous question. What could Hamilton have done inside that Ferrari to produce a reaction this strong? Because telemetry does not care about reputation, emotion, or headlines. It records braking, acceleration, speed, steering, and every tiny decision a driver makes. If Hamilton's data truly shocked Ferrari, then the reason may expose something the result alone could never show. But there is another possibility, and it changes the entire story. The surprise may not have been how fast Hamilton was. It may have been what the car prevented him from doing. Subscribe to the channel. To understand why this claim matters, you have to understand what telemetry really is. Telemetry is the car telling the truth. Not the driver, not the team principal, not a headline, the car itself. Every time Lewis Hamilton touches the brake, presses the throttle, turns the steering wheel, or fights the rear of the car, the system records it. Engineers can see where he commits, where he hesitates, where the tires begin to lose grip, and where the car refuses to respond the way he expects. It is like reading the heartbeat of an entire lap. And that is why the reaction described in this story is so important. The source claims Ferrari engineers were left speechless by Hamilton's Hungary Telemetry, but it does not provide the actual traces, the lap comparison, the corner data, or a direct quotation from those engineers. That means we cannot honestly claim which specific number shocked them. But the wording still opens a much bigger question. What would engineers need to see before they stopped looking at the driver and started looking at the machine? Because telemetry can expose 2 completely different stories. The first is the obvious one. A driver may be doing something exceptional, braking later than expected, carrying more speed into a corner, controlling a nervous car with tiny corrections that are almost invisible from the outside. The second story is far more uncomfortable. A driver may be losing time, not because he lacks speed, but because the car cannot give him the confidence he needs. And those 2 stories can look identical on the timing screen. A result only tells you where the car finished. Telemetry tells you why. Imagine 2 runners crossing the line several seconds apart. From the outside, one simply looks slower, but then you discover the slower runner was carrying a heavy backpack the entire time. Suddenly, the gap means something different. That is what engineers search for when they study a driver's data. They are not only asking, how fast was Hamilton? They are asking, what was Hamilton being forced to manage? Was he waiting before applying power? Was he protecting the tires? Was he correcting instability? Was he changing his approach because the car reacted differently from one corner to the next? The attached source does not answer those questions. It does not reveal whether Ferrari compared Hamilton with another driver, another session, or a previous race. It gives us the claim, but not the evidence behind it. And that missing evidence matters. Because the strongest telemetry story would not be a single spectacular corner. It would be a pattern. One braking zone might be driver preference. One slow exit might be traffic. One unusual throttle trace might be tire management. But when the same behavior appears again and again, engineers begin to see something deeper. A repeated delay. A repeated correction. A repeated moment where the driver asks the car for something and the car gives him something else. That is when attention shifts inside the garage. Because Formula One engineers do not become concerned by one imperfect lap, they work with imperfect laps every weekend. What concerns them is consistency. If Hamilton's inputs were consistent, but the car's response was not, the problem would be difficult to blame on adaptation alone. And if the car behaved consistently, but Hamilton's inputs changed dramatically from corner to corner, then Ferrari would need to understand what he was feeling before the data was recorded. That is the hidden battle inside telemetry. Numbers show what happened. They do not always explain what the driver felt. A steering correction can reveal that the rear moved unexpectedly, but it cannot fully describe the instant loss of confidence that follows. A delayed throttle application can show hesitation, but it cannot tell you whether Hamilton was protecting the tires, avoiding wheel spin, or waiting for the car to settle. That is why engineers combine the data with the driver's words. And Hamilton's experience makes that conversation especially valuable. He has spent years learning how a Formula One car changes through braking, corner entry, rotation, and acceleration. He knows the difference between a car that is difficult but predictable and a car that changes its behavior without warning. That distinction is enormous. A difficult car can still be attacked. An unpredictable car creates doubt. And doubt costs time before the driver even makes a visible mistake. This is where Hungary becomes an especially revealing test. The circuit demands commitment through a sequence of corners. One imperfect moment can damage the next one, then the next one after that. The driver is not simply controlling isolated turns, he is building a chain. Break one link, and the entire sequence suffers. That means the telemetry can reveal more than raw speed. It can reveal whether Hamilton was able to place the car exactly where he wanted. It can reveal whether he trusted the rear when turning in. It can reveal whether he could return to the throttle with confidence, or whether he had to wait for the car to become stable. Again, the source does not provide those specific findings. But this is the type of evidence required to support a claim as dramatic as engineers being left speechless. And here is the detail most people miss. The biggest shock may not come from Hamilton producing an extraordinary lap. It may come from discovering how much performance remained trapped inside the car. Because when engineers see a driver repeatedly reaching the same limit, they can begin separating human limitation from mechanical limitation. If Hamilton was making different mistakes each lap, the answer might point toward inconsistency. But if he was reaching the same barrier in the same way, then Ferrari would have something much more serious to investigate. A car problem that can be repeated is a car problem that can be found. DP. But it is also a problem that may have been costing performance for far longer than anyone realized. And that is where this story begins moving beyond Hungary. Because one race can be disappointing. One qualifying session can go wrong. One setup choice can miss the target. But telemetry can reveal whether the issue belongs to one weekend or whether it is built into the way the driver and car are working together. That difference changes everything. A weekend problem can be corrected quickly. A deeper mismatch can affect confidence, tire life, qualifying pace, race strategy, and every decision that follows. Ferrari would not only be trying to make Hamilton faster, they would be trying to understand why a driver with his experience could not access the performance the car was supposed to offer. And if the data showed he was already extracting more than the results suggested, the pressure would shift immediately, away from Hamilton, toward the engineers, toward the setup, toward the design choices shaping every corner. That is why the next part of this story matters even more. Because once telemetry removes the easy explanation, Ferrari is left with a question no team wants to face. What if Hamilton was not the weakness in Hungary? What if he was the clearest evidence of a weakness Ferrari had not fully understood? And this is where Ferrari's internal problem becomes much harder to ignore. Because once the data begins pointing away from the driver, every comfortable explanation starts falling apart. It is easy to say a driver needs more time. It is easy to say he is still adapting. It is easy to blame confidence, age, pressure, or the unfamiliar feeling of a different car. But telemetry can challenge all of that. If Hamilton's braking points were precise, if his steering inputs were controlled, and if his throttle application showed the same careful pattern again and again, then Ferrari would be looking at something far more serious than a driver having a difficult weekend. They would be looking at a car that was forcing compromise. And compromise is one of the most expensive words in Formula One. Because one compromise never stays in one place. If the rear of the car feels unstable, the driver may brake earlier. If he brakes earlier, he may lose rotation. If he loses rotation, he reaches the corner exit in the wrong position. If he reaches the exit badly, he cannot apply power cleanly. And suddenly, one weakness has damaged the entire corner. But that is only the first layer. The next corner may begin with less speed. The tires may heat differently. The battery deployment may be used in the wrong place. The driver may start protecting the car instead of attacking the track. One problem becomes 4. Then 4 become 8. And by the end of the lap, the timing screen shows a gap that looks simple, even though the cause is anything but simple. That is why engineers study patterns instead of isolated moments. They want to know where the lap begins to unravel, not where the stopwatch finally reveals the damage. And if Hamilton's Hungary Telemetry exposed the first moment in that chain, Ferrari may have discovered something they could no longer dismiss. Perhaps the issue was not raw speed. Perhaps it was trust. That sounds emotional, but in Formula One, trust is measurable. A driver who trusts the car releases the brake with confidence. He turns in without waiting. He commits to the throttle because he expects the rear tires to respond. A driver who does not trust the car does something different. He leaves a margin, not a large margin, sometimes only a tiny one. But tiny margins decide everything at this level. A fraction earlier on the brake, a fraction later on the power, a small correction at the wheel. One moment of hesitation that barely appears on television. The crowd may never notice it. The engineers will. And this is where Hamilton's experience becomes impossible to separate from the story. An inexperienced driver may struggle to explain exactly what is wrong. He may only say, "The car feels difficult." Hamilton has spent years learning how to identify the difference between a balance problem, a tire problem, a braking problem, and a deeper lack of stability. That does not mean every feeling is automatically correct. Telemetry still matters. But when the driver's description and the data point toward the same weakness, engineers have to listen. Because now they are no longer dealing with an opinion. They are dealing with evidence. And evidence creates pressure. The source does not reveal the actual traces, so no exact conclusion can be confirmed. There is no verified corner where Hamilton gained or lost a specific amount of time. There is no confirmed comparison showing one Ferrari driver against the other. There is no direct quotation proving what the engineer said inside the garage. But the claim itself creates a clear standard. For Ferrari engineers to be left speechless, the telemetry would need to reveal something unexpected, something that contradicted the easy story. And the easy story is always about the driver. The driver was too slow. The driver made mistakes. The driver could not adapt. The driver did not understand the car. Telemetry can destroy that story in seconds. Imagine 2 drivers entering the same corner. One appears faster because he carries more speed at the beginning, but the data shows he destroys the tires, misses the ideal exit, and loses more time later. The other looks cautious. Then the engineers discover he is protecting a rear end that is moving unpredictably while still producing a cleaner overall sequence. From the outside, one looks brave. From the data, the other may be doing the more difficult job. This is why raw lap time can mislead. A Formula One lap is not a single action. It is a chain of decisions. Every decision affects the next. And Hungary punishes broken chains. The track does not give drivers much time to recover. A poor exit can damage the next braking zone. A weak middle sector can destroy the tires before the final corners.